If you were to zoom out and just look at the global economy from a bird's eye view, an average American salary of like 70 or $80,000 looks like this incredibly powerful, gleaming golden machine.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? I mean, to much of the planet, that number alone suggests total abundance. It implies, spacious houses, medical security, reliable transport, a bright future for your kids, and just that quiet, comforting dignity of a growing savings account.
Yeah, from the outside, that machine appears virtually flawless. It really paints a picture of absolute arrived prosperity that, generations before us could only really dream of.
Which is wild when you think about it,
Okay.
because here is the massive paradox we are exploring in today's deep dive. For millions of people living inside that golden machine, life does not feel prosperous.
No, it doesn't.
It feels incredibly fragile. You're looking at a spreadsheet telling you that you are globally wealthy, but your nervous system is telling you you're broke. I mean, they wake up employed, they go to sleep anxious, they own the cars, the phones, the degrees, maybe even a home, but they do not own peace.
Right. That is a profound disconnect between the statistical reality of the income and the lived daily experience of the earner. It forces us to ask what is actually happening to that money.
Exactly, like where does it go?
Yeah, between the moment it hits the bank account and the moment the worker tries to actually live their life.
And that is our mission today. We are going to unpack what we're calling the middle class wealth lie. We are diving into a really fascinating document that synthesizes these structural realities, and it does so by drawing on international economic data from the OECD, healthcare insights from KFF, and tuition tracking from the College Board.
It's a very robust set of sources.
It really is. And the goal here is to figure out why Americans earn more but still feel so extraordinarily squeezed. And we are moving way beyond the usual simple explanations like recent inflation or a lack of personal financial discipline.
Right, because those things matter, but they aren't the whole story.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. I want to introduce a guiding analogy for you, the listener, as we go through this material. Usually when we measure prosperity, we just look at the water pouring into the bucket,
The gross income.
right, the gross income. But this source material argues that we fundamentally need to look at what it calls life lived after subtraction. We have to look at the massive structural holes at the bottom of the bucket.
That is, that's the perfect framing because the foundational premise we are looking at here is that the American middle class is not merely buying a lifestyle. They are privately financing an entire civilization.
Privately financing a civilization.
Wow. Yeah, and that is a staggering burden for an individual household to carry. Our goal in this discussion is to examine the structural design of this financial pressure. I mean, we are looking at an architecture of adult life that has been completely transformed over the last few decades.
So if the baseline equation of work equals stability is broken, it forces us to ask, where did the holes in the bucket come from? To understand why it's leaking so badly today, we need to trace how the middle class bargain evolved from the mid-20th century to where we are right now.
Right. So let's look at that mid-century bargain. For earlier generations, the equation for middle-class stability was blunt, but it was mathematically intelligible. You work steadily, you buy a modest home, you raise a family, and you retire with dignity, often with a pension.
Right, the classic American dream.
Exactly. Now, the source document provides a really crucial caveat here, and we need to mention it. This bargain was never equally available to everyone.
Well, for sure.
It was often built on exclusions, racial, geographic, gendered exclusions that America sometimes prefers to gloss over. But for a broad section of the population, the mechanics of that math actually functioned.
The inputs matched the expected outputs.
Yeah.
You put in the 40 hours, you got the house on the weekend.
Precisely. But today, the mechanics behind that equation have been entirely rewritten. Let's look at the why and the how of that shift, starting with retirement. In the 1980s, regulatory changes allowed corporations to shift away from defined benefit pensions.
Where the company guaranteed your retirement income.
Right, exactly. They shifted away from that to 401k accounts. And this wasn't just a simple update to savings accounts. It fundamentally transferred the massive risk of market crashes and longevity from the corporate balance sheet directly onto the shoulders of the individual worker.
Oh, wow. So the individual is now carrying the risk of the entire global market. I mean, it's a brilliant move for a corporation, but terrifying for a family. And you see that same mechanical shift in housing and education too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Housing costs haven't just randomly outpaced wage growth. Land use restrictions, zoning laws, and the financialization of housing, where homes are treated as speculative investment vehicles rather than just shelter,
Right, right.
all of that has artificially restricted supply where the jobs actually are. Meanwhile, higher education, which used to be heavily state subsidized and acted as a reasonable stepping stone, well, it saw those subsidies slashed.
And tuition just skyrocketed.
Right, because universities realized they could raise tuition indefinitely since the government would back the student loans. It transformed education from a public good into an incredibly expensive toll gate.
Wait, I have to challenge this premise just a little bit. I mean, I hear what you're saying about these structural costs, but it's hard to separate the necessity from the luxury sometimes.
How do you mean?
Well, hasn't our access to credit expanded massively since the mid-century? If someone finances a new iPhone or puts a massive flat-screen TV on a store credit card, that doesn't feel like survival to me. Doesn't the modern expansion of credit just give today's families more rope to hang themselves with?
That is a very common observation, and it's essential to untangle that. The source material directly addresses this tension. It argues that while luxury credit certainly exists, the systemic explosion of credit didn't expand primarily as a tool for flexibility or luxury.
It didn't.
No, it expanded as a mandatory survival mechanism.
Yeah.
As wages flatlined and real purchasing power from the 1970s onward, and the costs of those toll gates we talked about, housing, healthcare, education, as they skyrocketed, credit became the necessary bridge across that widening gap.
Ah, I see. So while someone might be buying an iPhone on credit,
Mhm.
the reason they have to use credit for the phone is because their actual cash is entirely consumed by the mortgage and the student loan payment.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. And what this has done is create a strange, almost unprecedented new class position in America.
Really? How so?
Well, there are millions of people who are too rich to receive systemic help, but too exposed to ever feel secure. They have the credit cards, they have the loans, they have the high salaries. So on paper, they look incredibly privileged.
But privilege doesn't automatically produce peace.
Exactly. Not when the basic foundations of your life are built on borrowed money.
Which brings up a fascinating dilemma. If the old, reliable equation for a stable life has been dismantled, people still have to find a way to survive. I mean, they still need healthcare, they still need childcare, they still need to get to work.
Right.
And since those aren't guaranteed anymore, they are being forced to buy that stability piecemeal in the private market.
Yes. And to see how uniquely American this specific financial maze is, we really have to look at the global contrast. The source uses OECD data to show how other developed societies handle these foundational pillars of life.
Okay, let's look at that.
In many other developed nations, things like healthcare, university education, public transit, parental leave, and childcare, they are treated fundamentally as public infrastructure. They are understood as collective responsibilities necessary for a functioning society.
They are the roads and bridges of human development.
Exactly. And they aren't perfect in those countries, of course. I mean, there are wait times, there are taxes, there are bureaucratic frustrations,
Sure.
but they are generally insulated from the private financial gamble. A medical diagnosis in France or Germany does not trigger a secondary crisis of potential personal bankruptcy.
But the American reality is structurally the exact opposite.
It is entirely privatized. In America, these collective responsibilities have been converted into private markets. The American worker pays taxes, just like workers elsewhere. But then the American worker pays again.
Oh yeah, over and over.
They pay for private health insurance premiums. Then they pay the deductibles. Then the co-pays. They pay student loans for decades. They pay massive car loans and insurance premiums because the built environment outside of a few major cities makes automobile ownership a mandatory condition of holding a job.
And childcare, don't even get me started.
Right. They pay for childcare that is so mathematically punishing, it literally resembles a second rent.
It's like paying for a premium gym membership. You pay a hefty monthly fee, your taxes, just to walk through the door of the society. But when you get inside, you realize you have to rent the weights by the minute.
Yes.
And you have to pay a toll to use the treadmill. And if you twist your ankle, the gym sends you a surprise bill for thousands of dollars because the ice pack they handed you is out of network.
What's fascinating here is how accurately that gym analogy captures the dynamic of the American middle class. If we connect this to the bigger picture outlined in the text, we are seeing a systemic transformation of the individual's identity within the economy.
How do you mean?
Well, the system turns the citizen into a customer. It turns the patient into a revenue stream. It turns the student into a lifelong debtor.
It demands you act like a savvy consumer just to survive your baseline necessities, which explains the phrase the author uses to describe the emotional state of the middle class. They call it managed exhaustion.
Banished exhaustion. It's a great term.
And I want to ground that for a second because it's not just an abstract economic concept. Managed exhaustion is the very visceral reality of spending 3 hours on the phone arguing with a health insurance representative over a $500 lab fee on a Tuesday night
Right.
after working a 10-hour shift while trying to cook dinner for your kids. It's a second unpaid job just administering your own survival. And you see how this constant financial anxiety impacts daily family decision-making.
Right.
It's like every choice is fraught with peril.
That is a vivid and highly accurate depiction of the text's argument. Real life isn't your gross salary. It is what remains after the invisible tax of distance, time, stress, risk, and all these privatized hurdles. And what remains is often not wealth, it is just that managed exhaustion.
But that creates an incredibly jarring visual paradox. If the cost of simply existing is this extraordinarily high, and people are living in a chronic state of managed exhaustion, why does the American suburb still look so incredibly wealthy?
That visual disconnect is one of the most powerful parts of this analysis. It's what the source calls the suburb illusion. You drive through a modern American subdivision, and the visual language of the American dream is completely intact.
Oh, absolutely.
The driveways have two newer cars, the houses have perfectly manicured lawns, the kitchens feature stainless steel and marble, the kids are enrolled in a dozen expensive travel sports. On paper and in photographs, it looks like total undeniable arrival.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text makes a profound distinction here to explain that illusion, one that I think we almost always mix up in everyday conversation. It separates the concept of wealth from the concept of leverage.
Yes, this is key.
It defines wealth as ownership, resilience, and time. Wealth is the ability to absorb a shock without changing your daily life. Leverage, on the other hand, is access purchased with future labor. A leveraged household looks wealthy, but they're just praying that nothing interrupts the payment schedule.
Okay, the sociology here is absolutely fascinating, and I know I'm geeking out a bit, but look at how brilliant this structural design is.
Go ahead, let out your inner sociology nerd. I'm with you.
The brilliance of the American economy is how extraordinarily skilled it has become at disguising leverage as success. It's almost a magic trick. A financed luxury car looks like prosperity to the neighbors. A credit card lifestyle looks like freedom on Instagram. Employer-linked health insurance looks like deep security, right up until the exact moment your employment disappears. The system creates deep structural insecurity, and then it markets identity, status, and comfort back to you as the cure.
I want to pitch an original thought to you based on this, because reading this completely changed how I view everyday consumer behavior. We are always taught that lifestyle creep, upgrading your car, buying the nicer phone, taking the expensive vacation when you get a raise, we're taught that it is a moral failure.
Yeah, that's the standard narrative.
It's constantly framed by financial gurus as just greed or a lack of discipline. But this document argues that status spending and lifestyle creep is actually anesthesia.
Anesthesia. It numbs the pain of the pressure cooker.
Yes. If a family takes a Disney vacation on a credit card because their entire year is just an endless corridor of obligation, commuting, and managed exhaustion, they aren't necessarily being shallow or financially illiterate.
No, they're not.
They are just spending money to feel briefly alive. They are buying emotional compensation for living inside a system that offers status way more easily than it offers actual security.
That is a phenomenal reframing of the data, because if
Mhm.
you view that spending strictly as a moral failing, you miss the structural pressure entirely. The system removes the safety net, isolates the individual, and then offers consumption as the only accessible form of belonging and relief.
Wow.
It demands that the middle class perform success before it actually possesses stability.
Perform success before possessing stability. That sounds like a recipe for a nervous breakdown.
It creates a constant treadmill effect on the human psyche, because once you build that image of success, you have to maintain it. You get a promotion, which means a higher salary, but then the pressure dictates you move to the nicer neighborhood for the better school district.
Right, because remember, good schools aren't guaranteed. They are localized to high property taxes.
Exactly, and that move brings higher expectations, a better car to fit into the driveway, a more expensive version of the exact same underlying anxiety. The worker is climbing the ladder, but the floor is constantly rising right along with them. And when you think about potential policy shifts that could actually restore long-term stability for households, you see why things like universal pre-K or decoupling healthcare from employment or widespread zoning reform are so fiercely debated.
Because they would change the very structure of that treadmill.
Right. If you implement alternative public infrastructure approaches like the OECD models we mentioned, you fundamentally change the economic stability of the household. The floor stops moving.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Because we aren't just talking about abstract economics here. We are talking about the daily reality of family decision-making. We're looking at an architecture that creates a profoundly restless society. A society where people are constantly optimizing their lives, constantly comparing themselves to neighbors, and constantly fearing a sudden catastrophic decline.
It really is exhausting.
It feels less like living in a stable home and more like balancing on a very narrow ledge.
This raises an important question, and it brings us to the ultimate point of the document, the fundamental American blind spot. The middle-class wealth lie survives because we continually confuse income with freedom.
But wait, I struggle with this part a little. The whole pitch of the American system is choice. We have so many choices now. I mean, I can pick from a dozen different health insurance plans during open enrollment. I can shop around for 10 different mortgage lenders. I can choose 50 different ways to finance my car. Doesn't that wealth of choice equal freedom?
That is exactly the illusion the text dismantles. We are told we have the freedom to choose our health insurance plan or our lender or how much student debt we take on, but the text argues that is merely the freedom of a consumer navigating a marketplace of absolute necessities. It is not the freedom of a sovereign person.
Because having to choose which corporate entity gets to profit off your basic need for medicine isn't true liberty.
Exactly. True freedom begins when basic life is not permanently under threat. It begins when an unexpected illness doesn't threaten you with bankruptcy and the loss of your home. When getting an education doesn't require mortgaging your next 20 years of labor.
Hey.
When you can survive a bad month or a job transition without entering an inescapable financial spiral. Until those baseline conditions are met, what looks like immense prosperity to the rest of the world might simply be a more polished, deeply comfortable form of captivity.
Now, I do want to do a quick impartiality check here because it's important to represent the whole document accurately.
Yeah,
And we are just reporting on the sources here, not endorsing a specific political viewpoint.
of course.
While the text is a sharp structural critique of these economic realities, it doesn't entirely let individuals off the hook. It explicitly notes that personal choices absolutely still matter.
They do.
Waste matters. Status spending matters. Financial literacy is still incredibly important.
Mhm.
There's a very real, tangible difference between a household trapped by unavoidable medical bills and a household trapped by uncontrollable luxury habits.
That's a crucial distinction. But the text's counterpoint to that is that the genius of the modern system is how effectively it blends those two things together. It makes the genuine necessities, housing, healthcare, education, incredibly expensive. And then it uses pervasive consumer culture to exploit the psychological despair created by those very necessities. It turns your natural insecurity into a desperate aspiration.
You might not be safe, but you can at least look successful while you panic.
Yes. And looking successful becomes its own kind of prison. The average American worker is earning a salary that impresses the world, but inside the borders of the country, that salary has to fight rent, medicine, debt, insurance, transport, childcare, and the quiet terror of having no real safety net beneath it all.
It's a lot to fight off.
It is. That is why so many Americans, even high earners, live paycheck to paycheck. Not because they are uniquely foolish, but because the cost of just being normal has become mathematically extraordinary.
It really reframes everything. You stop looking at the American middle class as a symbol of effortless, arrived wealth, and you start seeing it for what it is, a population trying to privately finance its own survival, one monthly payment at a time.
Exactly.
It shifts the blame from the individual's lack of discipline to the structural reality of the board they're being forced to play on.
It completely changes how you evaluate your own financial anxiety. It validates that feeling of managed exhaustion.
It really does. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We started by talking about that golden machine and the bucket of gross income pouring in. We've looked at the massive holes at the bottom of that bucket. But if true wealth is measured by resilience and time, rather than the gross number on your paycheck, take a look around your life today.
That's a powerful exercise.
Look at your house, your car, your subscriptions, your daily routine. How much of what you see do you truly own, and how much is just an expensive lease on your future labor? Think about that. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.